Right, good morning everybody. It's 9 o'clock and welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 23rd of June. First up, I'd just like to do the health and safety and just explain that this meeting is being recorded and will be on the Council's website. The meeting is also being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. So health and safety, please notice the exits and the procedures in front of the screen, and if there is the unfortunate case of an emergency, please follow the administration staff in the front here. And there is a defibrillator available, hopefully not required. Okay, so we'll move on to apologies. Are there any apologies?
Yes, Madam Chair. I just want to note my apology for early departure on council business.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Michelard. Are there any other apologies? Okay, so we just have Councillor Michelard for early departure. So I'm happy to move the apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. And we will vote. Who's missing? Okay, we're all good now. So that is carried unanimously. Right, item number 2, additional items. I am not aware of any. So we will go to item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none, so we will now move on to public comment. Are there any members of the public? I'm not aware of any public comment. No. So we'll now move on to item number 5, which is the petition for the new parking meter times, and that is Jerry Keating. So you may come forward, Jerry, and start when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson, PNCC councillors, council staff and members of the public. Today I present to the Palmerston North City Council my petition titled PNCC Keep the Parking Times as They Are, which is here. On Wednesday, June 2nd, Palmerston North City Council announced on social media that Palmy's city centre parking hours and prices were changing from July 1st, 2021. As a ratepayer and business owner who thinks they are up to date with what is happening in our city, this came as a huge surprise. While I can understand the logic in charging more for parking, it was the extension of the paid parking hours that got my attention. The current parking hours are Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and Saturday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., a total of 49 hours. The new proposed paid parking hours are Monday to Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., Thursday to Saturday, 8:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Sunday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., a total of 70.5 hours. 21.5 more hours of paid parking, or an increase of 44%. So why have council officers presented this new paid parking structure? In the announcement on June 2nd, council says that by introducing additional paid parking hours, we'll be able to discourage people from using all-day parking in the city centre and open parking for customers. This higher turnover of vehicles is good for shoppers to grab their takeaways, click or collect order, or stay a bit longer, while also helping businesses by bringing more people into the city centre. I appreciate that the primary purpose behind the changes is to ensure that there is a ready supply of parking within the central city. I'm sure we have all at some stage driven down Broadway Avenue, Main Street, King Street and around the square looking for a park and not being able to find one. However, this new structure is not aimed at people who are parking during the day. The people who work in businesses in the CBD and do not have an issue paying $1.50 an hour while they are at work. I used to be one of those people. I worked on Broadway Avenue close to the square, and whenever I had to be in the office for a couple of hours, I had no issue paying for paid parking. This new structure is aimed at people who go out in the evening and frequent the many businesses in the CBD and the various shows at our local venues, and those people who work at those businesses and venues. I challenge Council to prove that the majority of people parking in the evening are employees of those businesses. To date, no evidence has been provided, and if we are to believe the news from last week, there was actually no business consultation undertaken at all for this new structure. If one looks closer at the summary of proposed changes to parking charges as provided in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting on March 24, 2021, one can see that the extended paid parking hours are only expected to bring in an estimated revenue of $125,000. Is that figure really worth it? Did no one question Council staff when this was presented in March? Council's vision for Palmerston North is for it to be a place that offers small city benefits with big city ambition. This vision, aligned with Council's strategic direction, aims to make Palmerston North a vibrant and exciting city. Having lived in Palmerston North since 2006 and having attended or been involved in many, many events, I can safely say that Palmerston North is an exciting and vibrant city and one that I am proud to call home. However, keeping that title is not going to be helped by extending the paid parking hours by 44%. The petition I present started on Saturday, June 5th, and by Tuesday, June 22nd, had achieved 5,624 signatures. The petition was viewed 24,802 times and shared 1,763 times. Of the 5,624 people who signed the petition, 2,576 people associate themselves with Palmerston North, approximately 46%. There was also approximately 1,600 signatures from regions within a 2 to 3 hour drive from Palmerston North, 28%. I mentioned this figure as I know Council are working hard to bring visitors to our city, and for those of us who travel to Wellington on a regular basis, we know how expensive it can be for paid parking. Do we want to be another Wellington? The irony of the new structure is that not only will it impact events and activities run by local businesses, theatres, community groups and churches, it also impacts events and activities run by Council itself. Christmas in the Square, New Year's Eve, Fête de la Musique, Square Edge Pavement Art, Weekends on George, the Rural Games, the Festival of Cultures, and the monthly food truck events, to name a few. All of these events will be negatively impacted by the new paid parking structure. Every group running an event works hard and tirelessly to make their event attractive to their members and to the general public. They try to remove barriers to people attending and make their events accessible to all. Council itself is a huge driver in this respect. The majority of events take place on Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sundays, and more often than not, in the evenings. And this is the prime time for the extended paid parking hours. The new parking structure is a barrier, and the new parking structure will impact the vibrancy of our city. I implore Council to put a hold on the new extended paid parking hours. This new structure will not make our city better, quite the opposite. Go out and talk to businesses and stakeholders. Talk to the people that are at the coalface. Get their thoughts and opinions. We seem to be trying to solve an issue that isn't really there. You can find parking in the CBD in the evening, but yet our bars, our cafes, our restaurants and theatres are all busy. That's not an issue. That's a triumph. People will always complain about not being able to park right outside the door of the venue they are looking for. That's human nature. That's the price for living in an exciting and vibrant city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. You open for some questions?
Certainly.
First up, we have Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jerry, for coming in and presenting your petition so eloquently. My question is, your title of your petition is Keep the Parking Times as They Are. But looking at your comments, and I've had a little look online, it seems that most of the angst is around late night extension and losing the Sundays, which, as you covered in your petition, in your presentation there, is not the extent of it. So did you have anything particularly on Saturdays, where, as you said, currently we're 11 till 3, and the proposal is to go to kind of ordinary day parking then. Is that something that's caused a lot of angst as well, or is that a very minor issue in the scheme of this?
No, I actually called the petition keep the parking times as they are, because I think the parking times we have currently are fine. We are used to the fact that we have Saturday parking. Most cities have Saturday parking. Wellington, Napier, New Plymouth, Nelson, Rotorua, everybody has Saturday parking. It's the extended parking hours that I am against. The Thursday nights, the Friday nights, the Saturday nights till 9 p.m. and Sundays.
Yeah.
I just don't see the logic in that.
Thank you. That's what I took from your presentation. Great.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Jerry, for bringing the petition to us. Just wanted to know, sort of from a general perspective, whether you support a user pay model.
To be honest, I actually thought the increase to $1.70 could have gone to $2. I have no problem with paying for parking as it is now. I have no problem with all-day parking as it is now. If somebody wants to work in the CBD and pay $2 an hour for 8 hours while they're in their office, that's fine, that's their choice. I was in that situation when I worked on Broadway Avenue. When I had to work a full week, when I went from being part-time to full-time, I just got a parking spot at Downtown Cinema and parked on the roof, which was a lot cheaper than paying $1.50 an hour for 40 hours or 36 hours. There are other options out there. It's the night time, it's the Thursday, Friday, it's the extension of those hours. It's going to hit people going out. It's going to hit everybody that wants to go out into the city centre.
Yeah. Oh, we've heard your petition.
Yes.
We just wanted to clarify around that yes or no question, and I think I got a yes out of that.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
I suppose the other question that I have really is around where to from here. So last week we had some people speaking to us from Palmy Bid and Chamber of Commerce. Their perspective was go out and consult. I guess what I'm hearing here is don't change a thing. If we don't change a thing, we actually do change some things, including having to find some revenue or else cut services. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, would you like us to go consult? Would you like us to cut services? Would you like us to raise rates? Like, we need to do one of those three things.
Okay, well, the rates are already subjected to being up by 8% anyway. So that's already been publicised. I think at the time that this structure was being, processed and created back in March and beforehand, I think that was the time to go consult businesses and stakeholders. I think it would be very brave of the council and wonderful from the council to actually come out and say that they're not going to change anything. For the sake of $125,000, and that's coming from the council figures themselves for those extended hours, out of 430, there's still an increased revenue of $310 there. So I really don't, personally, I think it would be awesome for the council to come out and say, we've listened to the public, we're not going to change anything. But I appreciate that, obviously, with the consultations from the Chamber of Commerce last week and Palmy Bid, that maybe there is that desire to go and talk to the stakeholders. But I would have thought that at this moment in time, the public are talking.
Great, thank you. Just to finally clarify further then, so the $400,000 or the $125,000 slice of it is already built into the financial model that sits under the long-term plan and the rates rise. So the 125 or 400 would need to be found somewhere. So my question is really, do you think that people engaging with the petition understood that it wasn't 400,000 of extra money that was going to be spent on nice to haves? It was actually $400,000 that was built into the budget for the years ahead.
I can't speak for what everybody that may have signed the petition and their understanding of it. From a ratepayer, I'm getting used to blowouts on certain things. So, you know, maybe we could find that 125,000 from Cuba Street or from the new gates or from the social housing. I don't know. I just think in terms of the whole wide council activities, it is such a small part of everything, but a huge backlash for everybody that is out there trying to attend and go out and have fun in this wonderful city.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson. I'll make this the last question. There's nobody else after Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Jerry, did I just hear you say that we should take money from social housing to subsidise parking?
No, I didn't mean it like that, Lorna. I'm just saying that, you know, I don't want to get into kind of a he said, she said kind of thing. It's just, I really don't think that 125,000, while it is a nice sum of money, I think the impact it has on our city, on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays, it's huge. And I'm not saying, I'm just chucking it out there that there must be some other ways that we can find that money. We're going to maybe increase the parking to $2 an hour. That's an extra 30 cents an hour on the current times that we have now. That may be a solution for $125,000. I don't know. That's why we're putting it back to council.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thank you.
You may step down. And we now, the committee will resolve that the petition from Jerry Keating be received for information. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bowen. Are there any comments, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, councillors, you would have seen my comments publicly about this, and after the many phone calls, the many emails, let alone this, I just want to signal that I will be bringing a notice of motion, if I get colleagues' support, to pause and engage. We can all have opinions on the fees and the hours, and look, I think I do want to emphasise there's no such thing as free parking. It is subsidised somehow. So how that is skinned, I think, can be put back to officers. So I think what is really lacking here is the consultation, and rather naively, you know, and I'm included in this, we perhaps just slightly got this wrong. And I don't think there's any harm in going back with a light pause and engage and asking the CE just to look at what can be done. A couple of those questions teased out that maybe it's slightly increased fee, but again, it's just let's listen and understand what can be done. One thing's for sure, it is built into our LTP finances, so we have to accept that. But I do think we should be going in good faith and talking to our community. Look, it has rankled with many residents, visitors. I know a lot that signed that petition were visitors, obviously don't live here, but they still are affected. The retailers, the business, the hospitality and food sector have spoken. I've had numerous conversations with restaurants, bars and cafes. The thing that really got me is when the churches started contacting me and saying that they had some problems with being able to hold services within the city centre. So look, Madam Chair, I do think, I'll leave it at that, but I do think that if I get support, I will be bringing a notice of motion to you. Thank you.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like the Mayor's comments, I supported when he came out publicly and said that he promoted a pause and consult approach, and I would be one that would support the notice of motion for next week. Declare that now. In fact, I would almost be open just to putting a stop on the extended hours now and just make the call, because it's been very clear to me, and through a petition that's been signed by 5,600 or over 5,600 in such a short time, it's very clear signal from the community we got it wrong. As part of the healthy decision-making process, there's a feedback loop, and when we make decisions and the community come back and tell us quite clearly we've got it wrong, I think we need to open our ears and just make sure that we respond accordingly. And the best way to do it is to consider the notice of motion next week and take that pause and engage approach with our community. I see it being a very clear decision to make. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to say that we're elected by the community to represent the community, and the community have spoken really clearly on this. Not only the petition, every person I run into out on the streets are talking about this issue. And so I think under that circumstances, we have no option but to support the Mayor's motion and go back and look at this and see what can be done. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is a good chance to reflect on the feedback that we're hearing from the community and where to from here. Yes, like all of you, I've had plenty of conversations about this in recent times, and I would say that there is definitely a strain of genuine concern there in the community. There's also an incredibly wild rumor mill out there about all the things we are doing, might be doing, thought about doing, what this is going to mean. So in some ways, some consultation might just help in terms of actually settling down the rumor mill side of things and actually having people comprehend what's being proposed and what the rationale is and what the trade-offs are if we don't do something else. I think there's a whole lot of sort of that free parking mindset sort of dominated this, and as the mayor said, it isn't. It's subsidized. It's the whole community having to pay for that opportunity that that person enjoys. My main comment really, though, is that if we're going to pause, I think we need to really look at the opportunity to have a comprehensive conversation with the community about parking management. We haven't actually had that. This in and of itself is obviously reactive and also a bit bitsy if we just go out and have a conversation around this when we know that there's also conversations to be had around whether or not we do all-day parking. We know that there's conversations to be had around how we manage commuter parking, especially near the city center. And obviously, there's conversations about charges and hours. We'd be far better off as a council and as a community to develop and set an overall parking management strategy and then hand that over to officers to implement rather than trying to do bitsy all the way through. So I'd be very much encouraging the mayor to consider that and hope that we do look comprehensively at how we solve this with the community and then get it out of the political realm and onto officers to actually implement.
Sorry, Madam Chair, point of order. I understand there is a parking management strategy coming back to us early next year. Can the officers confirm that?
Yeah, we're about to commence that work. There's a workshop scheduled for, or we're working through the process of getting the workshop in August. I think potentially the strategy could be ready by the end of the year.
But it can't be ready in a month?
No.
Thank you.
Continue. You're right? Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also support the suggestion that the Mayor has put forward about pausing and engaging. I just have a question, probably for the Mayor actually, in terms of process. Is there an intention to move a recommendation today to that effect during the work plan so that there's some clarity for officers, given that it's the 23rd of June now and it was scheduled to be implemented on the 1st of July? Is next week?
Councillor will come to the council meeting next week.
Okay, so if that's in that case, then just perhaps a question to officers: is that enough advance warning to press pause if there's only one day? If a direction from council is given only one day prior to the new charges being implemented, how will that work in terms of operationally?
I'll just pass to Hannah, it's easier. Thank you, Hannah. And then you can have clarification.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What the Mayor has indicated is that he intends to revoke the resolution of Council in April, which took the recommendation from Finance and Audit in March on this particular issue. Because it will be a notice of motion to revoke a resolution, what that means, according to standing orders, is the Chief Executive is then restricted from acting on that until a decision is made on that particular point.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks. That's good to have the question answered of the process, of the decision-making process, but my question was also to council officers that if that direction was given in a week's time on the 30th of June, how that would work operationally in terms of being able to press pause on what was meant to be implemented by the 1st of July, or on the from the 1st of July.
Thank you, Sarah. You may speak.
Through the chair, there has been some work to reprogram parking meters and things like that. from the infrastructure side of things, which we could redo within the time frame of the start of July. So there has already been some work done, but there would be time to do it all. But I will pass to my colleague in customer to answer as well from the enforcement side.
Thank you. Yeah, we are actually in the middle of recruiting, so it is slightly tricky, but we're anticipating that we need to be flexible around what we do from there, so we're sort of taking that into account in terms of the arrangements we're making.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Right, so that is the end of the discussion. So we will vote. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 6, which is the confirmation of the minutes, part 1 public on page 9. I'm happy to move the minutes. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Is there any comments on the minutes? There being none, we will vote. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 7, which is the Palmerston North Airport Limited final statement of intent for 21-22, and that is presented by Steve Patterson. And Steve, I'll get you to introduce who we have. I can see we've got Murray Georgiel and David Latham. Sorry. Langham.
Yep. Yeah,
My mind went blank. So
Madam
over to you, gentlemen.
Yes, Madam Chair and councillors. As you said, Murray Georgiel and David Lanham from the Airport Company here with me. I propose just to say a couple of words and then we'll answer questions if there are any. As you'll see from the report, the company's come back to us with their final statement of intent for the year, follows on from the consideration you had of their draft back in March, which was endorsed by the Council on the 7th of April. At that meeting, the Council agreed with the direction that was proposed in that draft statement, and this final one has come back with a few changes that I've briefly touched on there in the report. So if there are any questions about those things, then I invite questions from councillors.
Thank you, Steve. Would the board like to make any comment or we'll just go for questions? Okay. First up is Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve, David and Murray. I'm just questioning the big increase in projected debt since the draft came to us. Can you give us a bit more background to that? Because it's gone from 30 million to 41 million.
The revised SOI makes some assumptions around our level of investment in Ruapehu Business Park. Within the commentary, you may have noticed reference to design builds with an approximate value of 7.4 million. So that's us having a review of optimism in the market for Ruapehu Business Park and confidence that we can go out to market and design and build and fund a number of commercial buildings. Now, those are all subject to business case, each individual one, so that's not CapEx that's going to be spent automatically. It's all subject to business case. Secondly, you may have noticed we have increased the estimated value of the terminal development by something like 2.3 million from memory. That's reflecting the fact that the original number of 15.5 to 16 was based on numbers from 2 years ago, and we recognise there's been significant increases in building costs since then.
Yeah, so some of it is the increase, some of it is no change of scope, but projected increased costs, which think we can understand on council, because we have this all the time. But some of it is an increasing scope, which is your design and build. So what has changed from the draft to here that's made you think that those design and builds are now the way to go, I suppose?
The level of optimism that we're seeing in the market for what we're doing in our area. Equally, we have a number of strategic partnerships that we're developing, and the confidence that gives us to consider these design builds.
Okay, so it's a more optimistic outlook. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being here. Just a few questions also on the similar issue that Councillor Johnson's raised with the additional debt and additional borrowing. When you came and presented the presentation to us in March, you said that cash flow management was critical, remains very critical, and that there was uncertainty, and that you were very wary of that. And there was also some discussion about possible need for our help. I guess in light of that, are you confident in being able to borrow the funds that you've outlined? Obviously there's quite a shift from the draft statement of intent to what we've got in front of us today. A few questions really. I am confident in being able to borrow those funds, and how soon will you expect a return on those funds? And are you confident of the dividend to council being reinstated by year 4, given the change in the projections around your financials?
So if I can answer each of these as you've asked them, Councillor Naylor, in respect of the funds and certainty of getting it, we haven't yet secured that funding arrangement for the significant increase. Each one of those is going, as the CEO said, each one of those would be a business case presented at the time and would require funding by a partner. We've already engaged with our major bank, and they are reasonably comfortable with the figures that we're giving them. That's in the first question. In regards to the second, the return would be immediately upon completion and those buildings being occupied, insofar as they are commercial rates of return for a commercial building. So there would be a lease arrangement in place for a significant period of time. So in other words, we do have a return immediately from occupation. With regards to the dividend, that will be very much, I would think that's very much up to the shareholder. At this stage, we've asked, and the shareholder has supported, that the dividend not be paid to the shareholder but be reinvested, because that's in fact what is happening. So the profit projected for the Palmerston North Airport Limited is to be reinvested for the next 3 years, and that's what we've put in our SOI. As we proceed through the next year, we will, and the year after and so on, we will in fact be engaging with the shareholder to see if you wish to continue that support or if you wish to see it paid out as a dividend.
Thank you. Perhaps just one follow-up question, if that's right. Excuse me. Thank you for that response. And yes, I'm aware of the decision that's been made around being willing to defer the dividend and for the purposes of reinvestment. Obviously, the increase in borrowings does have an impact on your finance costs, and subsequently your profits are a bit less than what they had been outlined back in March. Are you at all concerned with how that will look going forward in the long term? I mean, we see 3 years outlook here. I'm assuming you must look further out than that. In terms of the impact of the increased finance costs on your bottom line, what's the thinking around that?
So you did right, there is an increase in the financing costs, and that will be ahead of the return in terms of lease income. So there is a cost whilst developing various properties ahead of getting that return, and until such time as the whole of the business park is developed, that may continue. That doesn't mean to say there won't be revenue to match that. On the first count, yes, there's an increase in borrowing, but it will be matched, and it is matched, as you can see, by an increase in assets at every occasion. And most of that increase, as we see into the Ruapea Business Park, is being matched by, will be matched by more than the equivalent of finance costs, will be matched by more than that in terms of increased revenue.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, team, for the report. I have two questions, Madam Chair, if you allow me. The first one is on page 17, 2.3, bullet point 1 is talking about extending the project timeline from 30 months to 36 months, which is only 6 months extension. But in the last line, we are talking about completing it in June 25 rather than 23, which is 24 months, not the 6 months. Are we talking about two different projects?
Yeah, our internal planning for the terminal development is a completion in the final quarter of 2024, so that might be a typo. We are assuming that jet operations could commence in March, April or May of 2025, so the TDP has to be finished by then, so that's an error.
Okay, thank you. My second question is regarding getting this level 2 of the ACA program, Airport Carbon Accreditation. Is it only due to careful use of resources, or have we bought any carbon credits to get this level?
Level 2 is around reduction, so looking at what we're doing and reducing consumption. Level 3 and Level 4 start to look at optimisation and neutrality. So we're not quite to that point yet of considering carbon credits.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Armstrong.
My questions are around the additional capital expenditure and in particular for the business park expenditure. What's broadly the value proposition? How much shareholder value has been created from that additional expenditure? And then secondly, how has that been shown in the projected financial statements?
So the shareholder value is twofold. One is recognising that we have a significant value of assets which are sitting idle. That clearly there is no generation of revenue on those assets at this stage. So that has compelled us to look at what can we do to turn those assets into revenue-generating assets. The long-term value on those with property development is that we will have the opportunity to diversify our revenue streams, and that those revenue streams escalate as the value of land escalates over time, over a long period of time. It's also very consistent that this development aligns with the northeast industrial development and the rail development in that in the larger precincts. It can be complementary to that, and we see that this assists the city in its ambitions in terms of that industrial development. So we have the opportunity and we have the assets, and we're trying to make the most of both of those.
And how is that shown in these financials? What's the assumption?
So the assumptions in here are that we have got a small, I say small, but growing investment into the Ruapehu Business Park, and we will start to see the generation of revenue from year 2 onwards, and in fact that escalates over time. So what we're seeing is a growth in asset value, initially matched by a growth in debt profile. That over a longer period of time, beyond the 3 years, starts to benefit the company in terms of increased revenue, increased profit.
So is it fair to say that we've got the debt side on the balance sheet, but the returns and the cash back comes outside of this period?
They are very long term. So if we're looking at, say, 10 years, as the company has done, it's looked at this in terms of a 10-year window, and the benefits to the company and obviously to the shareholder grow over time.
Okay, thank you. So then my second question relates back to financial policy decisions and choices around how things have been funded. And I guess as I read through your paper, it seems to me that there's greater confidence, better revenues. When I look at those key financial metrics around interest coverage, debt to shareholders' funds, there appears to be quite significant headroom. So really it's a question of, and we are where we are, and we've agreed and supported dividends, but my sense of it is that things have changed, that there's greater confidence. So could you just comment on why you still feel that a 3-year commitment to forego dividends is necessary?
The outlook for the future is more positive now. We do have steady growth. We project that that will continue, albeit not to pre-COVID-19 levels at this point, but we're reasonably confident that there is a revenue growth ahead of us. There's more revenue to be achieved beyond just the aeronautical activities, such as the Ruapehu Business Park affords us. So that is another strength that we are seeking to develop. And in fact, it's the development of that we could clearly say is one of the reasons we're looking at the shareholder reinvesting or maintaining keeping the surpluses within the company, so that we are better abled to invest in the Ruapehu Business Park development.
Thank you for that. I guess then, would you comment, you must have done some preliminary work with your banks around the extent to which they have appetite. I mean, how much financial flex headroom do you feel exists in the company to borrow more?
We haven't had the final discussions with the bank. They have seen these financials and have informed us of their comfort at these levels. We haven't pushed any boundaries thus far. We will certainly be looking to engage more formally with them over the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steve, David, Murray, for being here. Steve, probably the first question is really to you in terms of, and it is in this dividend space. Obviously, the documentation in front of us signals a 3-year pause on dividend payments. Will there be opportunities along the way for review of that decision, or are we actually potentially locking in all 3 years sort of irreversibly?
It's not locked in irreversibly at all. Annually, we can review the approach that we're taking through the statement of expectations that we have of the company.
Thank you for that clarification. And 750,000 ish a bit would have been the expected dividend in the coming year. Could you just remind us what 750,000 looks like in terms of if we expressed it as a rates, sort of change to the rates level?
Yeah, it equates roughly 0.7% of the rates.
Of a rate, right, okay, great, thank you. I guess the other questions really then are for PNAL in terms of probably somewhat following on the line of questioning that you got before, but you know, if dividends were reinstated before the 3 years were up, you know, could plans, either financing plans or delivery plans, be adjusted in a way that could accommodate that?
Yes. I'll go further. Each of those developments will come to the board, and we'll need to consider that at each time. So this isn't a one-time expenditure and a one-time decision.
Great, thank you. And finally, a minor one, if I might, just looking at the current financial year on the budget and forecast side, there's a 50K budget for PFAS testing, but I didn't see any expenditure yet on that. Can you just update us on where we're at with that testing regime?
We're currently finalising a testing regime with PDP. There was some costs in May which didn't appear in the P&L, but there'll be about 12,000 by year end. Then the majority of it starts to flow in July, August.
Great, thank you. Thank you all, Madam Chair.
Councillor Harpeta.
Madam Chair. Thanks, Murray and David. Just one question around the Ruapehu Business Park. I know you've answered a lot of questions around this area, but with the demand and the need in this area, considering that the Milson has, around that area, there is some office space around that area which has been vacant for quite a considerable amount of time, have you explored that you have actually got a demand for your business park? Like you have actually gone and got, you know that you're going to be filling this business park?
We're confident. We use valuation companies, we use real estate firms. We're not seeking office accommodation as such. Looking at Mr Murphy over there, it's not part of the district plan. It's light industrial primarily that we're chasing, and there is demand for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just one final question from me. On page 37 of the financials, in the sale of asset column in red, there's a just over $1 million. Could I have some explanation of what sale that was?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but it relates to a profit on sale within Ruapehu Business Park. So originally we had projected that the costs of the lots sold are greater than they actually are. That's been revised down now as we're progressing with the whole issue around vesting and valuation of assets associated with that.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you. There are no further questions, so thank you very much, gentlemen. You may step down. And we have our recommendation on the screen. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Mr Mayor. And seconder, thank you, Councillor Hancock. So would you like to speak first, Mr Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, look, I will, and I was going to ask a question, but I think my colleagues teased it out around I suppose the design and build long-term lease versus perhaps rather short-term sell down of land, and that's obviously affected things slightly. But look, if I could just, Councillor, if I could just remind you all that most airports, and certainly just about every regional airport, went to their councils for some form of funding. To the credit of our airport company, they haven't come to us for any extra funding, and talking about dividends of certain amounts, that's in good times. This is COVID times. We've just seen what's happened in Wellington today, and you know, it's fairly volatile out there. So our directors have acted with, I would say, caution. And I also want to just comment on, effectively, council as a shareholder is getting a dividend. It's just not coming to us directly. It's being reinvested into property and capital projects. There's not being deferred. The dividends are there. They're just being chosen to be reinvested into the organisation. And they're both property projects, land projects, which are diversifying the revenue streams of the airport company. So it's not just purely aeronautical, it's air-related, but property investment. Excuse me. Look, the company is trading profitably in very difficult times, as I've just said, and really COVID has put a real spanner in the works for this organisation. But they're looking at diversifying their revenue stream, which I think is very, very smart. Looking at the balance sheet, the assets do increase significantly over the next 4 years. There's been a lot of discussion around the debt levels, but really total assets of nearly 100 million and equity of well over 70 million. And like with any large property or capital development, you do have to take on debt. It's just how you do that and being prudent about it. So I think we should be giving our airport company a vote of thanks and continuing the work they're doing in quite difficult times. Thank you.
Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly support the comments from the Mayor, and I guess it's a quality problem to be talking about whether we take a dividend or reinvest the dividend, so that's a great thing. What I would observe is that based on the financial metrics, there looks to be some quite significant headroom in terms of borrowing capacity and ability to lever this balance sheet, and I guess that's a choice that shareholders have to make in terms of where they hold their debt and how they fund their investment, and that's perhaps something that in the future we might debate more thoroughly and understand better the bookends of and the range of possibilities, but I certainly support the recommendation as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, Madam Chair, I'm certainly with you in terms of being heartened by seeing P&L in good shape and seeing the diversification plans there and acknowledging that it has been an incredibly challenging time. So very good to see the options and what's being put to us. My primary comment's really about pausing the dividend and for how long that might be appropriate, given that by pausing it, we're loading another 0.7% on the rates. Clearly at this time, we're still in a time of quite a lot of uncertainty around the travel sector and more broadly the economy. But even on their own numbers, we're seeing quite a strong bounce back in FY23 and FY24. And I think if those numbers hold, we as a council would do well to consider reactivating that dividend sooner rather than loading that cost on the entire community. So I'll certainly be watching with interest as this develops over the next 12 months and wish the airport company well in their full range of activity over that time.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with comments that have already been made. I think it is really sensible for the airport to be diversifying its revenue streams, particularly with the fluctuations in the airside revenue. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the tension is really where there's the short-term sacrifice for the ratepayers and the fact that they're not getting that dividend this year, and there's obviously, and the statement of intent indicates that will be withheld for a further 2 years. I'm pleased to hear that conversation can be revisited in the coming years. You know, the question that remains in my mind when holding that in the context of the rates increases that we are imposing on our ratepayers over the next 3 years of about 8% a year, it is a difficult thing to accept, perhaps an asset the size of what we have in the airport not returning any monetary dividend to the ratepayers to perhaps offset what is quite a significant rates increase. As has already been pointed out, it's around 0.75% of the rates increase that we have wouldn't have been there if we'd had that dividend. So whether the short-term sacrifice is worth the long-term benefit, only time will tell, and I'm heartened to hear the confidence expressed today, which is obviously perhaps a little bit a stronger confidence, I guess, than what we heard when they presented to us in March, where it did still seem that there was some uncertainty around their ability to borrow, etc. So, look, I think I'm happy to support this at this stage. I'm personally, I mean, we've obviously tested this in terms of making that decision about withholding the dividend, and that decision's been made, so I accept that. I'm not, I guess it's fair to say I'm probably not comfortable with that year after year. Whilst we did that for the COVID year, I wasn't expecting that to be perhaps a 4-year term, that the ratepayers didn't receive a monetary dividend from that significant asset. In saying all of that, it certainly, the ratepayers do receive a return on the asset in terms of the opportunities they have with flying in and out of the city, and that can't be underestimated also. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd just like to make a comment that it's really great to see the optimism in the market, and this has a flow-on effect right through the city in terms of jobs, and if people are wanting to invest in Palmerston North, I mean, this is, it sits within all our goals and what we're working for as a council. So I think it's like to compliment the board on the actions and the steering of the airport. So that's, most of everything else has been said. Mr. Mayor, do you want to write a reply?
Just very quickly, Madam Chair. Look, I just want a couple of comments. Ratepayers are getting a return. I repeat, the dividends are being paid. They're being invested in an asset which we wholly own. We wholly own the airport. Not every airport company or every council wholly owns their airport, either government or multiple regional owners. We own this airport, over $100 million worth of assets. This council and ratepayers own it. So they are getting a return. It's just not direct. And I think I'm sensing that some of you want perhaps the dividend coming straight back into this chamber. But anyway, that's a discussion we can have on an annual basis. I mean, there's nothing wrong with testing the waters at every year. But I do want to make the note, ratepayers are getting a return. It's not right saying they're not getting a return.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that's the end of comment. So we'll now go to vote. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 8, which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, January to March 2021, and that will be presented by Alan Downs. And welcome back, Alan. It's great to see you back in the chamber. And we have Patrick with Alan. Ready when you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just relating to the report, there is a new executive summary. It includes notable highlights over the last quarter, and there's also an area that it indicates how we're going to address the next 3 years and what we're going to draw on to build our strategic plan. We've also listened to the councillors, the councillors the last meeting, and there's been an update to the manual handling side with a new frequency ratio. We've added in a bit of background so those who are unfamiliar with frequency ratios may understand it a bit better. We've also updated regarding or identified a number of proactive measures, so we've written them down so it's not just verbally expressed each time regarding manual handling, and hopefully that's improvement. Around the audit reporting, we've brought a greater level of clarity there and also indicated progress regarding SOPs with a new graph. covers both competency and also SOP progress. We've also picked up on a request to put a wellness graph in. Now, that's not a perfect one, but it's a starting point. And thank you, Madam Chair. Back to you.
Thank you. Anything you wish to add, Patrick?
No, not at this point. I'll take it as read and happy to take any
Thank you.
questions.
Okay. First up is Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Alan and Patrick. And I appreciated the ramped-up reporting, I suppose we'll describe it as. That was good. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is about the frequency ratio for the manual handling. So, as you say, this is new, a new figure coming into the report. What I'm not clear about is why we've taken the whole staff to calculate the ratio, because I assume that it's not the whole staff that are involved in manual handling. Could you give some clarity to that?
All staff members... Can you hear me? All staff members have manual handling responsibilities, even office staff. So when you're looking at staff numbers and building frequency ratio, you've got to look at the hours that contribute or are involved when the actual, as we relate to the individual incidents. So I know that the frontline staff have heavier manual handling tasks, but all staff at some point are involved in manual handling.
Okay, so is the intention then with this ratio that we can use it to look at trends? So rather than reading too much into the number itself as it stands as a one-off data point, that will enable us to pick out trends more easily?
Once we build the frequency ratio history, we can look at, for example, 12-month moving averages, which will indicate whether or not we're trending in a wrong direction or going in a good direction. It will help, I think, as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my other question is around the turnover, which is towards the end of the report. So on page 50. So there seemed to be an increase in turnover in the last wee while. So employee-initiated turnover was 15.7%, and there's a couple of comments about this being a concern. Have you been able to identify any reasons for the turnover through exit interviews or through your manager's insights?
Through you, Madam Chair, turnover is absolutely a concern for us, and when we look back over, if I look at the past 3 years, in fact, if I look at the past 3 years, we'll see turnover was pretty much static from 2017, 2018, 2019. We averaged between 60 and 65 departures a year. That jumped up last year to 87, so a significant increase on 68. And year to date, that's jumped up again. So if I go back over the past 2 years, we've got a significant increase in our turnover, a 60% increase in our turnover. There are a number of factors for that, and we glean insight by looking through. We of course offer and encourage every employee to complete exit interview. Furthermore, our exit interviews are completed with a third party to try and make sure that we have as much of a chance of getting honest feedback on what their experience has been. The number one quoted reason for leaving the organisation has been around a perceived lack of professional development, learning development, and opportunities for them to grow. In terms of statistics, that's what the form tells us. When we correlate that with what our managers are telling us and what our people tell us in a variety of ways, through conversations, through speaking with staff support, the organisation is very highly committed at this point in time. And when we combine that with a very buoyant talent market, and I don't just mean Manawatu, which of course there's some downsides to being a really fast-growing region, but when we look at even at a New Zealand lens, the talent market in New Zealand, every company I speak to is experiencing challenges. The impact of border closure, the impact of reduced migration is having a real impact, and we're having to fully leverage every lever we have to make a compelling proposition to staff in what's a very buoyant market. The only thing else I can say is that we are doing, with the levers we've got, we are being as creative and maybe even bullish as we can be, to position the opportunity that exists in PNCC in the most positive yet realistic light, and to encourage people to the city and to the organisation.
Okay, thank you. So just to follow that up, having identified the lack of professional development as being the key motivator for people leaving the organisation, what have we got in place to address that?
Yeah, really good question. So again, everything's constrained by the resources that we have, but we have recently, in the past 3 months, we've initiated a pilot program to help us identify potential and create development pathways and career pathways for people. The organisation has had career pathways for some time, but it's been many, many years since those pathways were first developed, explored, and it's fair to say that the vision that the Council has on the last long-term plan is a new vision, it's a growth vision, and we want to make sure that our career pathways and opportunities reflect the capability that we need. You don't achieve a bold growth ambition by having an average employee proposition. And certainly I'm placing a lot of optimism on the impact we're going to have from this learning and development pilot.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Patrick. Question that I had arises page 45. The top of that page spells out the critical risks. And it's really, I guess, firstly, a sort of languaging question. We say that members of the public are a critical risk. Have we thought about other sort of language options there that might speak more specifically to the element of risk that's associated with members of the public rather than sort of the whole lot?
Yeah, look, there's... and this is a beautiful point on the wonderful nuances of local government. When we try to identify critical risks, one of the things which is really critical for us is that it's our people that identify the risks, and that they identify the risks in language that they understand. And sometimes the language that they understand we find a little bit confronting, and we could nuance it a bit better, and I completely get that point. But for me, at this point in time in our maturity, it's really important that our people have the ability to articulate what the risk that they perceive. Now, if there's nothing to stop me changing that in this report to nuance it better, but internally within the organisation, we do tend to use language that our people understand and our people have created.
Thanks. That's a helpful answer and insight around that. I suppose the further question around that area is sort of how we're going with providing sort of de-escalation training and support for staff members, especially those that have those sort of public-facing roles.
Yep. So again, I might draw on if my colleague in customer wants to add any more insight, he certainly can. We have conducted, on a number of instances this year, we've conducted de-escalation training, and my understanding is we've actually expanded the scope of that as well in response to what our people say that they need. Further to that, as recently as last month, we initiated some work with people who are at the front line to get insight from them and how we could support them better in managing the risk beyond de-escalation training, because a lot of it comes down to how they cope after the incident, not just how they handle the incident. And they're reporting back to me next week, and ultimately to the executive, I believe, next month, so as we can look at what mechanisms we have in place to help them manage the impact of what can sometimes be quite gnarly issues.
Yeah, great. I guess if I can follow that up a little bit, I would like to understand sort of what's being done in that sort of back end of that loop, basically, in terms of making sure that we have good awareness around the comfort levels that staff members have, and that they're not, in a feeling that they're in a tough spot that they're not ready for.
So, look, a wonderful question, and I would say one of the great strengths, this is simply anecdotal, but one of the great strengths of PNCC from my perspective is our people do not lack candour, and they are appropriately access whoever they feel they need to access to voice their concerns. As I mentioned with the workshop that we undertook last month with the cross-section, I think it was actually specifically targeted on the Pink Shirt Day. We want to make sure that we're not just equipping them with skills and tools to to de-escalate, to handle in the moment, but to support what's happening to them afterwards. And I'll be very happy to bring back to this committee what we find and what we do about it.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. My first question is just around the comment that you've made that you're persisting in your efforts with problems or issues arising from excavation. And I guess I'd just like to understand, or perhaps question you, that if your efforts aren't working, you probably need to do something differently. So what's your strategy to get on top of this and solve it?
So one of my colleagues is just eager to share the wonderful insight and experience that she has in this, so I'm happy to let her lead, Madam Chair.
Sarah.
Through the Chair. In terms of the excavation work, there are some specific risks that we face that are not specific to Palmerston North. They are industry-wide issues to do with technical issues, whether there are services and power cables and things that aren't marked on current maps or are marked in wrong locations, whether there are deep excavations where we're concerned that the sides may cave in where people are in there, as examples of the risks that we're worrying about. What we have to do in those circumstances, obviously, is when a near miss or an incident occurs, we have to go back over our standard operating procedures and check whether they are valid for all the risks and update them. So the work that Patrick talked about is ongoing. Every time there's an incident, we have to go back over our standard operating procedures. We go back and we look at our equipment. We go back and we look at our training to make sure that we're learning from things that happen and making sure that everything works well. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Sarah. Look, it sort of gets to the nub of the issue, but I don't think it answered my question, because clearly you've been going back and re-emphasising the importance of following due process and making sure that the boxes are ticked, and you're following up on the incidents, and I think that's great. But if things are still happening, even after all of that follow-up work and training, then what's going to change to get on top of this? What?
Through the Chair, the work that I'm talking about, in health and safety, ultimately your risks come from, your risk mitigation comes from understanding the root cause. And you might change one thing, and then you find that there's something else that's also contributing. And I'll take hitting cables as an example. There's a genuine issue all over New Zealand where many of the utilities haven't marked down what's in the ground in the right place. They've got a design drawing, but what they did when they were out building turns out to be different. Traditionally, we've managed that through digging by hand in the location of where we think the services are, and then once we think we've cleared all the services, then starting to excavate properly. But because there might be more services even than we thought there were, occasionally that means someone has impacted on a service, a cable strike. We've updated the methodology to go, we need to get the service owners out there to mark things off. This is an example, by the way, not just a thing. But we've actually looked at best industry practice, and best industry practice is to use a water-based vacuum system to wash out soil, to use water to wash out soil so that you can see more clearly what's in the hole, right? So you start using that, and then you find that you still don't, find all of them because they're in different directions to the lines that you have identified. So then you start a new system of covering across. So it's a continuous process of what is the root cause and how can we best address it.
So thank you, Sarah. So your answer is that you are addressing the root causes and that it's not a cultural, attitudinal issue that you need to address. It's
through you, Madam Chair.
Lack of records.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to clarify that when I deliberately use the language persisting, I'm in no way suggesting that we continue to do the same thing and reinforce failure. What I'm most encouraged about, as you all know, I've got a wonderful portfolio that comprises people, technology, health and safety, and performance, so I'm spoilt for choice. But health and safety has a focus like no other in my mind and in the organisation's mind. And as all of you will know, lifting capability and changing behaviour is something that we need to persist in. I am very encouraged by the level of reporting we have. And the level of reporting we have will mean that from time to time around this table you will appropriately ask me questions on why we're having more incidents, on why we're having more near misses, on why maybe even, although the trend's not showing at the minute, on why we're having more lost time. But I'm encouraged because reporting is helping me identify root cause. And the answer, Mr. Armstrong, is it's all of the above. It is capability, it is behaviour, it is process, it is tools. And I can assure you that management is focusing on health and safety in the way in which it deserves. And my colleague in infrastructure has been very proactive in initiating a complete operational review of procedures because our people don't know what they don't know. And sometimes the procedures that were written and the procedures they've been following for the past 10, 15 years were written before the hydrovac existed and we don't know. So we are absolutely trying to be proactive, get to root cause and pull all of the levers that will keep our people and of course the ratepayers and residents safe.
Thank you, Patrick. Pleased to hear that. My other question was around members of the public, and I note an incident and 3 near misses. So I guess my question is, what have we learned from that incident, those 3 misses? What have we changed? What have we actively done to keep members of the public safe? To engineer out that risk? How has that worked through the system?
So in terms of I might again refer to my colleague for the operational staff. You know, clearly I don't wear the high-vis vest. But as it pertains, if you're talking about the risk, through you, Madam Chair, if you're talking about the risk that our people feel is presented to them, sometimes by behaviour of the public, or how we keep members of the public safe through our county construction, civil engineering.
Yeah, well, guess what I think the worst nightmares are that we hurt one of our staff or a member of the public. So I think, I'm pleased to hear that it's got the absolute front and centre attention of the management team. My question is in relation to our health and safety system. Every time there's a near miss, it's fuel, but it's also a nugget of gold in my mind, and we should be picking it up, turning it over, shaking it, thinking about how we engineer risk out of those processes. So my question is, what have we learned? What have we done? How did that work through our system?
So just in terms of, through you, Madam Chair, critical risk number 10, which is uncomfortably phrased members of the public, pertains to the risk that is posed to our staff as a result of potentially behaviour, aggression, inappropriate conduct of the people that we serve. So just those 3 near misses and 1 incident pertains to that, as opposed to pertains to incidents that happened members of the public if they were approaching a construction site or something.
Is that a separate risk that we capture?
Yeah. And it is a separate risk. We provide such wonderful services to the community, and we deal with the full spectrum of community of the beautiful people in Palmerston North that sometimes bring their whole selves to places like the library, their whole selves to the facilities that we provide, and sometimes what's presented to our staff is the complex outcomes that deal with whatever these people are facing. And we do have incidences, and again, I'm using the library as an example, it's not the only case, where people demonstrate aggression towards other people, towards staff, potentially towards equipment. And in specific response to your question, I would just sort of refer back to Councillor Barrett's earlier question. What we've specifically done on that is what we recognise we were training people to de-escalate and help them be safe in the instant, but it's only by following up on these incidents that we got the insight that what our staff needed was some help to deal with the aftermath. And that's what we're working through, so I'll bring that back. I can ask my colleague to talk about the risk that's posed to members of the public through the kind of hard infrastructure space, if that's useful.
Did you want to follow up on that, Mr.
No, look,
Armstrong?
I think that's
covered.
The question was really to get a sense of how we treat near misses, what we do. We take them as an opportunity to engineer out risk, and I think I'm comfortable with that.
That's been covered. Thank you. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Patrick and Alan. I'm just looking at page 49 and annual leave. I just wondered if you had a management plan for the management of annual leave.
So through you, Madam Chair, yeah, absolutely we do. And what and I would say our managers across the organisation on the whole are proactive in working with their teams to strike that right balance of giving individuals the freedom to choose to take leave when they need leave, whilst of course maintaining business continuity. We do have a number, it's around a dozen, so I can't be too specific, where there are exceptional leave balances, and they are in positions where we have probably the greatest challenges in depth. Now, quarterly as an executive, we look at that and we look at the plans that are in place to manage that. And some of the steps that I've seen managers take over the past 6 months is to look at how we alleviate the problem being the lack of depth, and then work to how we can free people up to take the leave that they need if they're to be well and if they're to make their greatest contribution to PNCC.
Thank you. Second question was around, have you got any staff that are on long-term sick leave? And is that in a response to ACC, or is that just as on long-term sick leave in other circumstances?
Through you, Madam Chair, excellent question. I mean, the answer is we do, but I don't have the numbers. My recollection from a discussion we had yesterday, and I might defer to Alan, is we have one that relates to a safety incident that's been long-term sick this year, which is a reduction on previous, on the same period last year. I think we had 3 this time last year. But there are, of course, a number of non-health and safety factors that can contribute to sickness leave.
So how does it affect our ACC rating?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't want to guess, but I would like to just come back to you, if that's okay on that.
So if you can come back, that'd be great.
Absolutely will, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Just a further question on turnover on page 50. I know there's already been some questions on that. I was just trying to understand the employee-initiated turnover of 15.7% is higher than the total annual turnover of 14.5%. And I'm just wondering if I'm not understanding that correctly, or I would have expected the employee-initiated turnover to be lower than the overall percentage, or why? Is there any explanation as to why that's higher than the overall rate?
Through you, Madam Chair, there will be an explanation. and if Mr. Wilson was here, he would be able to equip you with it.
I guess just trying to unpack this a little bit. I mean, obviously it's well over the 12% that's regarded as a healthy indicator. We've got, I mean, looking at the numbers, quite a lot, there's about 70, I think, that have left in the last 6 months, so which is quite a bit higher than perhaps the 6 months before. Do we have, do we have a sense of the overall trend? Like, that shows us 2 years, but where we've come from, I mean, is this a trend that's going up significantly more recently, or is it a little bit of an up and down thing?
Through you, Madam Chair, a significant increase in the past 2 years. So from 2017 to 2019 was static at between 63 and 68 departures a year, jumping up to 87 departures last year, and I think we're currently at 110 this year so far. Obviously, this is the last year, so it's a significant increase.
Okay, and thanks for that. And just trying to understand the other, I'm assuming the other is employer initiated. So would that, are we looking at terminations?
So in general, there's a number of factors that could sit under other, but in general, where the organisation has restructured to make sure it has the capability and capacity it needs, where there's no redeployment opportunity, then severance applies. That would be captured under the other.
Okay.
Of course, with the high number of vacancies, we have a lot of opportunity for redeployment, and we actively explore those.
So can I understand, because some of those numbers are higher than I would have expected also, so are those others, is that assuming that they haven't been redeployed, or are some of the numbers that are there?
No, if it's showing as turnover, that will be they've exited the organisation. That will not be that will not include any redeployments.
And is there a healthy indicator for our sector for the other category?
I wouldn't be. I mean, just as I have discomfort with the 12% healthy mark. I mean, it's a guide. As you all know, the council is a really diverse business. If I looked at, for example, contact centres in that sector, not in local government, but in the contact centre industry, anything between 25 and 30% is pretty normal. Whereas in some other roles, some other professional services organisation, you'd be looking turnover of anything over 5% would give you concern. So 12% is an average, and it gives us a rule of thumb. In terms of the other, to be honest with you, in my many years of working in a variety of different sectors, I have never seen a kind of indicator for what you might look like in terms of other departures. What you can often look like is the number of restructures you're doing. Does that feel high or low, or why are you doing it? But that would be a different issue.
Okay, thank you. And just one further question. On page 55, the graph there, incidents by activities, it's got 42% of that is the blue dealing with the public. And I was trying to figure out, get an understanding of, I mean, it's quite a big part of the pie, what those sort of incidents are talking about. Down in the description, there's one example of a member of the public falling off a ramp. But what other sorts of incidents are we talking about when we're talking about dealing with the public? Are they incidents for staff, or are they incidents for the public?
Incidents for staff related.
So it's when staff have an incident when they're dealing with the public, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's generated because of exposure to the public. It could, I mean, some of the data we're capturing under dealing with the public or threatening behaviour is recorded in different areas, such as it could be someone could say, I was in the park and a member of the public came to me, they put it down, they were working in the park. We collate that data together to actually pull together the actual percentage of the dealing with the public, if that helps. But it's people who work for us that are exposed to something where it's unhealthy for them or unhelpful for them because of the public attitude or response.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Alan and Patrick. Just a couple of, hopefully, minor questions. The turnover statistics, is there any, I guess I'm not talking at the council chamber level in terms of the report, but is there any internal tracking of the trends with the turnover that is employee initiated that correlates through to exit interviews around, I guess, satisfaction versus just somebody having a really great career opportunity, or do you know what I mean?
So through you, Madam Chair, there's a number of data points that management look at, and they range from the kind of, from the entirely objective exit interview completed by a third party, which is simply reporting what what the individual told the organisation. There's a component of that which looks, again, through the third party, what managers think about the exit. Was this a regrettable loss? Was this not a regrettable loss? And then we also correlate that with other insight at a unit level. So, for example, hypothetically, if we were to have a unit which had a high number of grievances or a number of allegations or complaints around bullying, I mean, we triangulate all of that information to work with managers, so as managers have the tools to do what we try to do in the civil construction area, identify the root cause. The biggest so yes, at a management level, we do all of those things. We are very dependent on what people tell us, but as I said earlier, we do have a very candid organisation, and that's a strength. It's a real strength of this organisation that people feel free to engage and connect with whomever they think appropriate to share their perspective, and I found that a little bit interesting in my first 3 months, but it is a strength for us, and it helps us identify where there are root causes that then management can try and affect a change in a different way.
Okay, so from that then, in the assessments done at a management level, is there, and you've acknowledged that the turnover is particularly high at the moment, and including this current year, is there concern outside of what can be controlled? So we've talked about how there's challenges with the workforce and competing workforce across the country because of border restrictions, as an example. But is there concern with general trends outside of that?
Not at an organisational level. Not at an organisational level. Whether the organisation has the means to maintain and stay relevant in a vibrant, increasingly vibrant economy and an increasingly brutal talent market, when what we see, probably one of the biggest impacts to us has been, if I look at central government in Wellington, a lot of central government organisations which were previously insistent on having people working in Wellington are now completely agnostic about where people work from. So a lot of that opens up a lot of opportunities for talented people in the regions to have their cake and live in a wonderfully beautiful city like Palmerston North and avail of a range of other opportunities too. And we are actively doing what we can to make sure we not only stay relevant, but we deliver for our staff the vision that you have for ratepayers of the benefits of being a small organisation and yet pursuing big things.
Okay, thank you. Under wellbeing, there's a comment around the depot contributing to 14% of overall figures for the gym use, and that's obviously there's a small gym set up there. What percentage of our workforce would be based or perhaps have the depot as their sort of primary work location?
Yeah, look, ballpark around a third.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful. And then just my final question was around there's been a few questions around members of the public, incidents and near misses, and I think you've clarified that this is around when staff are engaging with members of the public. So when we receive feedback around somebody tripping on a particularly bad piece of footpath, as an example, and there's injury caused, how are we capturing that and feeding that into, I guess, the citywide perspective on health and safety?
Okay, in the report you'll see an incident that occurred with a member of the public walking on a ramp to a bus.
The bus, yep. Okay,
so we do capture it. As long as it's put into People's Safe, we will capture it and we will report on it. And they are normally addressed individually as you find out why it happened, and they're addressed individually.
Okay, so if somebody contacted the council and sustained an injury as a result of perhaps our infrastructure or our equipment, then that would be likely noted through this report in some way.
Hopefully it's put into People's Safe. I mean, if it comes through the I suppose, front desk, I'd be uncertain if that's actually happened to find out.
So it's our expectation that any health and safety incident or near miss that's reported to the council finds its way into the systems which allow us to report on it. The hesitancy in our response gives us an indication that, it's an area that we need to make sure that that expectation that I have sitting here is the same expectation that the people that might receive the calls or observe the action have as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, just a quick final question, if that's okay. On page 49 on the wellness indicator graph, there seemed to be a big increase in pastoral contacts and other contacts for VTI in December just past. Are you able to comment on why you think that occurred, or give us any insight as to why it went up at that point and now it's come down again?
So these are quarterly figures. At that particular point, my thoughts are that we've come in through 2020. There was quite a need there, and Vitae were involved with a lot of our staff around stresses. However, also one of their staff members, a key player, had a health issue, and there was a drop-off as they found other people to replace him. But it looks like also the actual numbers seeking stuff around stress has dropped from that perspective. That's my view, but I'd have to have that confirmed. Wayne delves into this stuff mainly.
So through you, Madam Chair, that's the working assumption that we have. As you can appreciate, the kind of pastoral aspect of the VTI service is there's a relationship component to it. We have 3 members of the VTI team that routinely work across CAB, the depot and the library. And given that people build up a relationship with the person when they're away for a period of time, then that often does influence the number of pastoral contacts, particularly whenever people know they're returning. So, it's, so I think that's a sensible enough hypothesis. The other comment that I would make is in the other insight that we get from VTI, which gives us some indication about what people want to talk about. It's a real mix. Like at a high level, again, don't quote me on it, but it's approximately 50% of the things that people want to talk to them about are nothing to do with work, but to do with life's stressful for people, life's busy for people, and certainly we've just had a Site Plus audit completed last week. Have yet to see the report, which of course will come here, but in a hot debrief, the auditor absolutely stressed the perceived value that our people feel from the VTI staff support services. So that's another positive piece of insight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, there's no more questions, so thank you, Patrick and Ellen. You may step down.
Thank you.
Somebody happy to move the report? Thank you, Councillor Barrett and Deputy Mayor. So over to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really pleased actually with this report. I think it sort of got its mojo back. If you remember a few cycles ago, we were concerned about the depth and breadth of reporting in the health and safety space, and this is the first time I've seen a report come through that really feels like it does have the appropriate scope, and good to have a robust discussion about it today. So really it's a thanks to Alan and folks around him and to members of management for really driving this through to a good level so that we have confidence as a council about how we're managing health, safety and well-being in our organization.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would echo the comments of Councillor Barrett. I think my comments when we received the last quarterly report were that I was really, really pleased with the improvement of this report, and I can certainly say that again. I think it's very evident that staff are hearing feedback through questions and comments and continually improving this report. I also would like to acknowledge that the GM of People and Performance is quite a way with words with answering questions as well. But just the other thing that I'd like to point out would be the reporting statistics. I think actually really, really positive. There's clearly a growing culture here of openness and honesty around reporting. And I know particularly a few years ago with some of the reporting being quite low, I think that was probably a bit deceptive around the actual state of health, safety and wellbeing for the organisation. And we've certainly moved away from what may have been of some shame around reporting, particularly near misses. And so I think that the reporting culture, as highlighted through the questions, is really positive. And actually, if we are continuing to see some of those trends increasing around reporting, that's actually a positive, that's not a negative. So yeah, really happy with this report and good to see the continual improvement.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. Also echo the comments that have already been made about the quality of the information that's coming in this report is really pleasing. Just one area of concern, I guess, I'd like to highlight, and that is in the whole area of turnover. I guess this is something we'll need to keep an eye on going forward, but just reflecting on the investment that's been made in the organisation around the workforce transformation, and we've prioritised 250,000 operationally, plus 500,000 capital, so 750,000 in the coming year that's targeted towards workforce transformation. And I guess my expectations in seeing the outcomes of that investment would be about efficiency of work, quality of work, but also I'm hoping would be satisfaction for employees, improved satisfaction for them working in this organisation. And I would hope that that would be reflected in the numbers in terms of people choosing to leave, that would reduce. I guess only time will tell, but certainly I think it would be good for us to keep an eye on that and perhaps have an increased understanding of the reasons for people leaving the organisation. We've heard some of that today, but in an ongoing way, I'm hopeful that trend will decrease to get back into what is regarded as a healthy level for an organisation like this, and I'm hoping that the investment that has been prioritised in the coming year will contribute towards that also.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, echoing colleagues' comments about the quality of the reporting, which is improving every time, which is really good. And I think just wanting to reflect on some positives from this report, you know, the decrease in lost time injuries is very pleasing to see, and the increase in training opportunities being taken up, also good to see. I am concerned about turnover, particularly because turnover has a big effect on productivity in a department, and it also has a big effect on public confidence in that department. So, you know, when we see a lot of new faces in an area, we often get comments as elected members that, you know, from the public reflecting on that. And so I think there's a risk with high turnover that institutional knowledge is lost and that the continuity doesn't carry over, and I see that some of that is going to be addressed in some of the reports that Richard received later this morning. But nevertheless, there's some issues for us as an organisation if the turnover is too high. And I would, I mean, I heard from the Chief People Officer that there is a pilot underway to try and identify some career pathways, but I think we've just got to join the dots here, elected members, that, you know, we've come off the back not only of a COVID year, but a year in which staff were under quite significant pressure in terms of the number of vacancies that were being carried and in terms of pay. And whatever people might say in an exit interview, we all know that salary and working conditions are significant motivators. And if you're offered a significantly larger salary elsewhere, you know, most people are going to take it. So we've got to remain competitive. And when we're looking at budgets as a council, we've got to understand that there's a flow-on effect into ability of the CE to retain staff when budgets are cut. And so I just think that it's all very well for elected members to be talking about turnover, but we can do something about that from this chamber in terms of the budgets that we put up, in terms of the cuts that we decide or not decide to make, and in terms of the programmes that we approve in terms of workplace transformation. So I'd just like you to keep that in mind. And also from a staff point of view, I would like as much information as you're able to pass on about this, because I think it's helpful for elected members to understand what the issues are and what can be done about them. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
And finally, Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for this report. I think it's been really well received by everybody, but I also think it's been a bigger improvement on the last report that we did receive. Just a comment around the annual leave. I do think that we have got a liability there, and I do think we need to keep an eye on that liability. 21.13 days per employee is quite a large liability, and it's something that we do need to keep an eye on. So I do think that is something, as elected members, it's something we've got to watch out for. Also, is that long-term sick leave, knowing how many we've got, how many employees we've got that are on long-term sick leave is important to know. But yeah, well done on reporting, and good to see that we are going forward. I do really like the dashboard. I think the dashboard's really good to see, so thank you very much for another great report.
Thank you, and we'll now go to vote. And that is carried unanimously. And we're now going to break for morning tea, so we will be back at 11:05. Okay, councillors, it's 11:05, so I'm going to resume. Now, our next meeting's at 1:00, so if we're not finished by 12, I will adjourn and we will continue after the Committee of Council meeting. Right, so our next item is item number 9, which is the Assurance Report and Review of Council Policy Framework, and we have Ms Suma and Julie. So over to you, ladies, when you're ready. And that is on page 57.
Morning, everyone. Happy for the report to be taken as read and take any questions through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms Suma. Councillors, are there any questions? Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question, and thank you for the report, my first question is just around the policies and scope for review, Appendix 3. So when I look at that list, there seems to be gaps or things that I would expect to see within a policy framework that aren't there. Things like, for example, code of conduct, health and safety, and there's a few others. So I just wanted to understand what it meant. What is in scope for review? What was the implication of that? What did it mean?
So we have, and I'm not sure if I've explicitly stated this anywhere, but we have excluded management policies from this scope, and that's because a separate review has already been completed on that about a year ago and reported to the Chief Executive at the time.
So what do you mean by management policies? I mean, wouldn't code of conduct or health and safety be an important part of the governance framework?
We have looked at, it would be, but I think I think they're approved by the Chief Executive at an operational level, whereas the ones that I've focused on are the ones that actually come through the chamber for approval.
Okay, thank you. So my next question then was around, I think your first key finding that there is no formal policy framework in place. And I guess just reflecting on that and also reflecting on your comments about having a policy framework being an important component of the governance framework. So my question really is, when I think about that, there needs to be a clarity on what's up for decision and when, what the review is and who decides, and that's a governing body or it's the mayor or the management team. And it needs to be set out and clear, and there need to be disciplines in place and timeframes, and it needs to include all of the things that are important to the elected body and the management team. So there's a clarity. And I guess my question to you, Ms Suma, is will your recommendation get us to the point where what's up for decision is clear, when it needs to be decided upon or reviewed is clear, and who actually holds the power of veto or the power to agree? When will we have a clarity on that? And is that covered in your first recommendation?
I think the policy framework will definitely determine what the definition of a policy firstly will be, and then where that goes. So what the difference would be between a management policy and what would be a council policy, and which goes where, and what the criteria is to determine each.
So, because they're all part of the governance framework.
Yes, overall.
I think that's the thing that we want to get clarity on and agreement, so that we can bring discipline and manage our way through. So that will be an output of this first action.
I hope so, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Masoma, for your report. Somewhere in your report, you have mentioned that the policy register is not available to the staff, and neither it is available to the public. Can I ask who holds this register?
It is currently maintained by the governance team. Sorry, I'm just going to recheck the wording of it. It's not readily available. It is available to staff internally at request or if they know where to find it, but it's not readily available, so it's not in it, yeah.
Oh, it's not restricted?
I don't believe it's restricted, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Masuma, and thanks, Julie. My question is really around the sort of strengthening the monitoring and review side of things. And clearly there's a sort of future articulated where reviews would be happening based on timing, but wondering if you've, what consideration and perspective you might have around reviews that might be triggered not just by timing, but by sort of how the monitoring is going. So if the monitoring's sort of tracking along fine, we actually don't need to spend time on a review, whereas if the monitoring is getting out of sync, we then trigger a review?
Yes, that's exactly what's been recommended. So that is the long-term intention, is that they will be based off the monitoring. In the meantime, until we have the monitoring in place for every policy, we've suggested that there be a review tracker to ensure that every other policy is brought up to date.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you for the report. Just following on from Mr Armstrong's questions on Appendix 3, the policies and scope for review on page 66. So there's a comment at the bottom there about elected appointed member policies, and the one that has already been reviewed was the expense and allowance policy. One of the other policies that was mentioned during that process was the elected member professional development policy. So other governance type policies like that, where would we expect that to be included, or why is that excluded from this list?
So elected member policies were part of scope. They just don't fall into that diagram as such because we don't go through the normal consultation process with them. So what I've essentially just said there is they were part of scope, they're just not part, they wouldn't be following the same process. And the way they'd be covered in the future is there would be a policy framework model, but you would just determine which parts of that applies to elected member policies and governance policies and which applies to the rest of them.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
So not quite, because I wasn't meaning. I mean, I'm aware that one's been reviewed, but for example, the professional development policy, it was mentioned that will be reviewed, but it's not included here. So where would we find, a list of what governance policies will be reviewed and when, just so that happens as a matter of course rather than someone having to raise it and give direction to that specifically? Is there a process in place for governance policies, I guess is more the question. And for example, the code of conduct isn't there either. So specifically for governance policies, what's the process for them to come up for renewal and be re-looked at?
I think that would be covered through the recommendation on number 6, which is they would form part of that review tracker. And that would indicate when all of them would be next reviewed.
Okay. So what page
Page 63. Number 6. So basically we've said there that there should be a review tracker put in place to ensure that all policies are brought up to date. So I would expect those to be included in that list.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, there are no further people in the queue. So thank you, ladies. You may step down. Now, would someone like to move the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Harpeta. Councillor Naylor, do you want to speak first? Okay. Is there anyone wants to speak? Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this is an absolutely brilliant review. I think it is definitely time that we had all of these recommendations, actually. Coming into this chamber as a new elected member, it was quite difficult for me to figure out where we were at with all sorts of things. And one of the first things I tried to do was figure out what policies we had in place. And so that list on the, I think it was on LG Hub eventually that I found, that is mentioned here, that had these really old kind of decisions that council had been making over the last, I don't know, 10 years or something, it was really interesting. And it's been hard for me to see how our policies connect with our goals and the things that we're trying to do, and I guess keep up with all of that. So I think this is a brilliant review where we start to look at how we can put systems in place so that we're keeping on top of all of these policies and actually joining the dots between the policies and the decisions that we make in this chamber week after week after week. So I think they've done a brilliant job, and I'm very happy with it.
Mr. Armstrong.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, echoing those comments, I'd just like to say that getting on top of the policy framework, having a clarity around which policies are critical, what the review is, the discipline around following it, and who holds the decision power are really important hygiene things that underpin clarity around the governance model. So I think it's a very worthwhile piece of work. As a comment, I think a really good starting point is to actually take a step back and work out what's actually there and get it down, decide whether it needs to be amalgamated, joined, simplified, and form a view on when they need to come through the various decision-making bodies, and then stick to that discipline would be a great start. But I certainly support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. I totally agree. There's no one else in the queue, so I am happy to take the vote. Mr. Mayor? Oh, he's carried, that's right. So that is carried, 16 votes for with 1 abstention. We now move on to item number 10, which is Business Assurance Accountability Report, and we have Ms. Suma again, and that is on page 69. Ready when you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With this report, I'd just like to note that we have tried a new format. It's ongoing changes. Happy to take feedback, as always. Tried to make it as concise as possible, but still give you the information that I think would be relevant or important or add value as such. So happy to take feedback, but otherwise happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. And first up is Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ms. Suma. I wasn't quite clear how it was that findings from Audit in 2017 are only now being addressed. Was it just an oversight? I mean, it's fine if it was just an oversight, but and secondarily to that, are those findings still relevant? Because we're, 4 years on now.
Ms. Suma.
Yeah, the questions that probably more relate to me than Ms. Suma. Two answers, I guess. Some of the issues that they addressed pertain to procurement, for example, and we've taken some fairly significant steps in that space, but we're not done yet. And so while we're progressing, the recommendations, they're resource intensive and they take time, and we haven't really got there. Some of them are repeat offences, so things like doing reconciliations on time, for example, which continually turn up, are I guess, indicative of ozone, the financial system, not being as good as we want it to be and indicative of the, I guess, lack of resources we have within the team to put a real focus on it. So in answer to your question, there is some stuff from the 2017 review that we haven't got on top of, is the answer. We've taken significant steps, but we're not there yet. There is some stuff that is a repeat offence, and because we haven't completely solved the problem, they still turn up in this report as, I guess, an outstanding issue from 2017.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Masuma. Just had a question around the first paragraph in the background on the front page there. You talk about, in that first sentence, about the follow-up on actions and sort of your role of actually looking at how effective that's been. I was interested in the second sentence then, where you say that the process includes determining whether management or the committee has assumed the risk. Can you just unpack that a little bit for us, and especially help us as a committee understand how we would know if the risk has been assigned back to us?
Yes, sure. So basically, there are three options there are a few options when we raise a recommendation. One, management could accept it, and then they go and action it. Second, they could propose another solution that mitigates the same risk to an acceptable level. So then we have that conversation and accept it. Now, sometimes when you follow up, you realise that it hasn't really been done, and they're willing to accept the risk as it stands. In that case, I would be highlighting that to you and saying, this is what's been recommended. They would like to accept the risk. Would you accept that? You would need to approve it as a committee. It would be highlighted, but there are no such instances at this point in time.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further questions? There are none, so you may step down. Right. Sorry, Councillor, you came in too late. Okay, I'm happy to move the report. Councillor Harpeta, second. And I'd just like to comment that I'm pleased to see this report, but I'm not pleased the fact that 4 years and some of these issues haven't been haven't been resolved. Things like reconciliations, which has always been my pet one in the past, that it reoccurs, its head's risen again. So I'm going to take this report that this will be the final time that we'll see some of these, I expect not to see these in our next report, following the, obviously, the timelines and that they will not be late, because I think the time is for us to take the accountability to make sure that these things are highlighted, and that if there is a problem with management not being able to do any of these things, then they need to bring a report back to council before this report comes to us to highlight, and if there's additional resource required, then we need to put that in place. Does anybody else wish to comment? No, so we'll put the vote. And that is carried unanimously. Right, we're now on to item number 11, which is the committee work schedule. I'm happy to move the schedule. Have a seconder. Thank you, the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments on the schedule? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a brief question. We've got, I think it's item 12 on this one, has a November report back around a procurement review. And I know the Planning and Strategy Committee has a long-standing item around procurement policy around social and environmental impact, and just wanted to know if those two things were talking to each other, or what we might expect.
Through you.
They are in alignment with each other, I believe. Oh, no, I'm getting shaking heads from Masuma. Perhaps I might ask Masuma to come down and answer that question. She may have more clarity than me.
Thank you.
The procurement review that's coming through will be an audit against good practice. So it's about the practice and not so much about the policy, I believe.
Okay, great. That's clear then. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
In future, perhaps with these reports, we'll just put the word audit in them and that will clarify. Mr Armstrong.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question. Should we in fact be scheduling a follow-up on the policy framework review in this work schedule?
It will go through the normal procedures.
So it will come back?
It will come back, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and it will be added again for the next one, yes. Thank you. Okay, we'll now... And that is carried unanimously. Right, we'll now move on to item number 13, item number 12, exclusion of the public. And I move that the public be excluded for items 13, 14 and 15 as per our work schedule, and that's for reasons set out in Finance and Audit Committee minutes, third-party commercial health, safety and gain advantage, and third-party commercial. Have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. And we'll go to vote. And that is carried unanimously.
Madam Chair, is the video turned off?
We're just,
Yeah.
I'm just going to say